All right, now we begin with the second half of economic toss-ups and bonuses taken from NAQT Packets non-national championship level. So we'll begin with number 39. Bonus. For 10 points each, answer the following about Adam Smith. This 1776 book on economics by Smith used the term invisible hand to describe how market forces can improve the general welfare. That is The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations illustrated this economic concept using examples of workers at a pen factory. Emil Durkheim wrote an 1883 book titled For This Concept in Society. That is the division of labor. This two-word French phrase describes the philosophy espoused by Smith in which governments limit or minimize their role in regulating economic activity. And that is laissez-faire. Number 40, a bonus. Ragnar Frisch distinguished this branch of economics from a branch that focuses on aggregated outcomes for 10 points each. Name this branch of economics that studies individual behavior while macroeconomics focuses on the whole economy. That is microeconomics. In the 1970s, this economist's critique of macroeconomics led economists to construct macroeconomic models based on microeconomic foundations. This Nobel Prize winner also helped develop rational expectations. That is Robert Lucas. Robert Lucas. Part C, Lucas applied his critique to the Phillips curve, which shows a trade-off between unemployment and this rate that measures increases of prices over time. And that, of course, is the inflation rate. Part 41, a bonus. For 10 points each, answer the following about the economist Milton Friedman. Friedman taught for 30 years at a university in this Midwestern city, where he worked with Gary Becker and Robert Fogel. That is Chicago. Friedman posited that, even in very strong economies, there was a natural type of this rate, the percentage of available workers unable to find a job. That is unemployment rate. Part C, Friedman stated that this curve, which shows a trade-off between unemployment and inflation, is applicable only in short term. And that is, of course, the Phillips curve. 42, toss-up. This man argued that athletics and service programs had no place in universities in his book, The Higher Learning in America. This economist names high-end luxury goods whose demand increases as their price increases. A book by this man claimed that people purchase goods to display their social status, thus engaging in conspicuous consumption. For 10 points, name this author of the theory of the leisure class. And that, of course, is Thorstein Veblen. 43, a bonus. Proposed types of these constructs includes contraditive waves, which take about half a century, and a type name for Simon Kuznets, which last about 15 years. For 10 points each, give this term for the periodic expansions and contractions of an economy. The theory of these things suggests that they recur regularly. They are business cycles. Business cycles can be shown by measuring this value, the total economic output of a country's residents over time. And that is the GDP, gross domestic product. These periods where intense interest in a good greatly drive up price before it bursts can drive business cycles. Examples include the Dutch tulip mania and the dot-com boom of the 1990s. Those are economic bubbles. 44, toss-up. This economist imagined a helicopter dropping bills from the sky in a paper arguing that monetary policy should promote steady deflation. This author of The Optimum Quantity of Money proposed an increasing the money supply at a fixed rate with his K% rule. With Anna Schwartz, he wrote A Monetary History of the United States. For 10 points, name this economist who championed free markets in Capitalism and Freedom. And that is Milton Friedman. Number 45, a toss-up. An approach melding law in this discipline has been advanced by the appellate judge Richard Posner. Richard Thaler's 2017 Nobel Prize honors the behavioral type of this discipline, which diverges from assumptions of human rationality among its neoclassical school. Ragnar Frisch distinguished micro and macro subfields within, for 10 points, what social science of scarcity whose tenets include laws of supply and demand. And that is economics. Number 46, two toss-ups. I forgot to number them independently. This discipline originally had the name starting with the word political, but its modern name was popularized by Alfred Marshall. Sorry about this. Thomas Carlyle called this discipline the dismal science. There are macro and micro branches of, for 10 points, what discipline studied by Milton Friedman, and that's economics. This same question then has, obviously, another toss-up that is melded together. You will see on the actual document. Toss-up. This economist used the analogy of a beauty contest to explain how rational agents work within a stock market. Fiscal policy involving deficit spending was central to the theory of, for 10 points, what British economist who wrote the general theory of employment, interest, and money? And that is John Maynard Keynes. Toss-up 47. Richard Nelson and Sidney G. Winter popularized the evolutionary form of this discipline. The Heckscher-Ohlin model was developed by this discipline's Stockholm School. The marginal revolution ushered in the neoclassical school in this social science. Topics such as comparative advantage and market equilibrium are studied in, for 10 points, what social science that examines consumption of scarce resources? And that is economics. 48, a bonus. The first modern income tax, introduced by William Pitt the Younger in 1798, had this property. For 10 points each, give this term for a type of tax whose rate increases as the taxable amount increases. That is progressive tax, what we have here in the United States. Progressive taxation has been argued to reduce this phenomenon, which is a gap in wealth or income between different groups in a population. That is economic inequality. A progressive tax is similar to a sales tax on luxury goods, such as the goods named after this author of the theory of the leisure class. That is Thorstein Veblen. 49, a bonus. This man gave a new definition for the state at the start of his essay, Politics as a Vocation. For 10 points each, named this German pioneer in sociology. He proposed that the Protestant work ethic contributed to the rise of capitalism. And that is Max Weber. Max Weber. Weber used this economics term to describe the total control the state tries to exercise over violence within state territory. A business described by this term can sell products without competition. And that would be a monopoly. Part C. In Weber's formulation, state violence also has this property with a Latin-derived name. This word refers to a people's sense that the government authority is justified. That is legitimate. 50, a toss-up. Two of the major forms of this phenomenon are its cost-push and demand-pull types. The inverse relationship between this phenomenon and unemployment is plotted on the Phillips curve. Ian MacLeod coined a portmanteau combining this phenomenon with stagnation. An extreme hyperform of this process took place in the Weimar Republic. For 10 points, name this economic phenomenon in which price levels increase over time. That is, of course, inflation. Inflation. Just cleaning up something really quickly before we move on to number 51, which is a bonus. 51, a bonus. For 10 points each, name these concepts used in welfare economics. Welfare is a way of summing this value, which represents the satisfaction derived for a consumption for every agent in an economy. That is its utility. Taxes and monopolies can cause this kind of welfare loss, represented visually in the Harbinger triangle between demand and supply curves. And that is the deadweight loss. One component of welfare is this kind of surplus corresponding to the area between the demand curve and the price line. And that is the consumer surplus. 52, a bonus. Economists use this term to refer to tangible objects that satisfy human wants. For 10 points each, give this term often contrasted with services. And those would be goods. This term refers to any goods such as an entry-level cars or instant noodles whose consumption decreases as income increases. And those would be inferior goods. Part C. This type of curve shows combinations of goods from which a consumer derives equal utility. That is an indifference curve. 53, a bonus. The natural form of this situation occurs in industries such as utilities. For 10 points each. Part A. Name this economic situation in which there is only one seller of a given good or service. That is monopoly. A monopolist will determine its quantity of output by setting marginal revenue equal to this quantity, in contrast to a company in perfect competition, which will set price equal to this quantity. That is the marginal cost. A monopoly leads to this type of economic inefficiency, which is graphically represented as a triangle and is abbreviated OWL. And that is a deadweight loss. Deadweight loss. 54, a toss-up. In 2018, it was revealed that hiring decisions in this department and the law school at George Mason University had been influenced by the Charles Koch Foundation and other donors. Two professors in this department at GMU write the Marginal Revolution blog. James M. Buchanan's work on public choice theory won a Nobel Prize in this field of social science. 10 points, named this field that studies supply and demand. And of course, that's economics. 55, a bonus. The Lucas critique called for the use of foundations, name for this subfield. For 10 points each, name this subfield that deals with the behavior of individual and firms, unlike macroeconomics. That is microeconomics. Microeconomic analysis often assumes that individuals maximize this quantity that in economics stands in for how much usefulness or value an individual gets from a good. And that is its utility. The change in utility produced by an increase in consumption of a good is denoted by this 8-letter term that, in economics, generally describes concepts associated with changes in the amount of something that is produced or consumed. That is marginal, as in the marginal utility. 56A bonus. For 10 points each, name these concepts from economics. This kind of curve usually slopes upwards and represents the quantity of a good that producers are willing to sell at each price. Oh, the answer is missing here. Surplus curve, I'm assuming. Supply. Typing it in. Yeah, supply curve. This is the point where the supply and demand curves meet. It indicates the price at which every produced good will be consumed. And that is the equilibrium point. Part C, the equilibrium quantity is the production level at which this cost of making one more item is exactly equal to the equilibrium price. That is the marginal cost. 57, a bonus. For 10 points each, name these economic situations. A market in which a unique good or service is provided by only one firm. It's a monopoly. OPEC is often cited as an example of these groups of producers that work together to fix prices and limit both supply and competition. That would be a cartel. A market in which there is only one buyer. The U.S. military sometimes comes close. And that is a monopsony. A monopsony. Not monopoly. One buyer. 58, a toss-up. The John Bates Clark Medal honors young thinkers in this field whose history involves the Austrian school and the marginal revolution. It was called the dismal science, and Paul Samuelson has won its Nobel Prize. For 10 points, name this social science concerned with supply and demand. And of course, that's economics. 59, a bonus. For 10 points each, name these economists. This author of an essay on the principle of population believed that geometric population growth would lead to mass starvation. And that is Thomas Malthus. This University of Chicago economist and the author of Capitalism and Freedom was a noted proponent of monetarism and a critic of the Phillips curve. That is Milton Friedman. In an 1870 Part C, 1817 work, he explained the law of comparative advantage. An equivalence between taxation and government borrowing is named for him. That is David Ricardo. Toss-up 60. This quantity defines the horizontal line at the bottom of the triangle quantifying consumer surplus, and economists recognize 3 degrees of discrimination via it. The vertical axis for demand curves represents, for 10 points, what quantity symbolized P, the cost of acquiring a good. That would be its price. 61, a bonus. A central concept in economics is the happiness, satisfaction, or value obtained through consuming a good or performing an activity. 10 points each, name that abstract concept that rational people are thought to maximize. That would be utility. This 8-letter adjective denotes the additional utility obtained from consuming one more unit of a good. It generally decreases with increased consumption. That would be marginal, as in the marginal utility. These curves connect points representing bundles of goods that have the exact same total utility for an consumer. That would be an indifference curve, and that might have been a repeat. I apologize if it was. 62, a toss-up. This man is the namesake of technical change that is neutral with respect to labor and capital. He formulated the model that plots real GDP against the interest rate in his paper, Mr. Keynes and the Classics. The Slutsky equation relates shift in a quantity named for this man to those in a quantity named for Alfred Marshall. For 10 points, what economist formulated the ISLM model and is the namesake for a type of demand? That is John Hicks. John Hicks. 63, a toss-up. A 1992 paper showing that this process occurs faster in poor countries was written by George Mackin, David Romer, and David Weil. High debt levels inhibit this process, according to a 2010 paper by Carmen Reinhardt and Kenneth Rogoff that had errors in its Excel data. Population increase and technological process are factors in the exogenous Solow model of, for 10 points, what process in which an economy's GDP goes up. That is economic growth. 63, it is a bonus. Many economists have namesake laws for 10 points each. Okun's law states that real GDP will be about 2 percentage points lower than potential GDP for each percentage point that this other statistic increases. This statistic can be classified as frictional or structural. That is unemployment. This French economist's law, sometimes called the law of markets, states that economies will have enough income to consume the goods that they produce. And that is Say, as in Say's law. Part C, this French economist's law states that in an economy with n markets, if at least n-1 markets are in equilibrium, then the entire economy will be in equilibrium as well. And that is the Valra law, Leon Valra. That is very difficult. 64 for 10 points each, a bonus. Answer the following about seminal economic papers in the field of imperfect information. This American economist examined moral hazard in the market for medical care in a 1963 paper. He also devised a namesake impossibility theorem. And that is Kenneth Arrow, as in Arrow's impossibility theorem. In the market for lemons, George Akerlof showed that asymmetric information causes adverse selection in the market for used examples of these goods. And lemon refers to a car, a bad car. In a 1981 paper, Joseph Stiglitz and Andrew Weiss concluded that imperfect information in these kinds of markets causes rationing. And those are credit markets. Credit markets. Number 65, a bonus. This man offered an early analysis of significant tests in his book, Methods of Statistics. For 10 points each, named this British economist who wrote mathematical physics and is the namesake of boxes that show utilities of two economic agents. That is Francis Edgeworth. An Edgeworth box employs these lines that connect bundles of goods with equivalent utilities. And that would be indifference curves. The slope of an indifference curve is related to the marginal rate of this process, which occurs when an economic agent decides to give up consuming one good in favor of consuming another. And that would be a substitution. 66, a toss-up. Alvin Hansen developed a theory for the secular form of this phenomenon. Tyler Cowen argued that the U.S. may see a great form of this phenomenon due to a lack of low-hanging fruit. Insufficient investment demand and a declining labor force may cause this phenomenon. Growth is near zero for extended periods under, for 10 points, what economic phenomenon which occurred alongside inflation for much of the 1970s. That would be stagnation. So combined with inflation, it was the 1970s stagflation. Number 67, that's a bonus. For 10 points each, give these economic concepts with multi-word names. Adam Smith coined this two-word phrase, which describes how individual self-interest benefits the collective good. That is the invisible hand. This phrase describes the situation when a group of individuals deplete a resource that none of them owns, like a fishery, while acting in their own self-interest. That is the tragedy of the commons. Game theorists often study this situation in which two criminals are faced with the decision to cooperate or defect, but cannot consult with one another. That is the prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma. 68, a bonus. The supply curve of this quantity is backward bending, meaning that less of it is provided at both low and high wages. For 10 points each, name this economic concept that, along with land and capital, is one of the three traditional factors of production. That is labor. Economists recalculate this rate by finding what percent of people who are searching for work cannot find a job. That is unemployment. Unemployment rate. Part C, the unemployment rate includes workers who do not have a job because of this type of unemployment, which occurs when a worker is transitioning from one job to another. That is frictional unemployment. 69, a toss-up. This man's son, James, heads a project at UT Austin to gather global inequality data. This thinker argued that the need for planning in large corporations has supplanted competitive markets and described the power of advertising in the new industrial state. He coined the term conventional wisdom to describe ideas acceptable to society. For 10 points, name this Canadian-American economist who wrote The Affluent Society. And that is John Kenneth Galbraith. Number 70, a toss-up. A graph plotting the intersection of aggregate demand and national output is called this economist's cross. Milton Friedman predicted that this man's school of economic thought would cause stagflation. He attacked the levels of German reparations and the economic consequences of the peace. For 10 points, named this economist who advocated deficit spending in his general theory of employment, interest, and money. And of course, that is John Maynard Keynes. Number 71. In his Theses on Feuerbach, this man complained that previous philosophers had merely interpreted the world, but the point was to change it. 10 points each, named this German who collaborated with his friend Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto. And that's Karl Marx. Part B, according to Marx's philosophy of history, this social class was destined to overthrow the capitalist bourgeoisie. And that is the, of course, proletariat. The bourgeoisie is, of course, the producing class, or the factory owners. This critique of political economy was left unfinished at Marx's death. It attacks commodity fetishism and expounds on the labor theory of value, and that is capital, or das Kapital. 72, a toss-up. In a thought experiment by this man, sometimes proposed as an alternative to quantitative easing, money is dropped out of a helicopter. A number of this man's students advised Augusto Pinochet. This man predicted that the long-run Phillips curve is vertical, providing an explanation for stagflation. For 10 points, name this libertarian Chicago School economist who developed monetarism and wrote Capitalism and Freedom. And of course, that is Milton Friedman. 73, a bonus. For 10 points each, answer the following about taxation. Taxation usually distorts decisions away from the optimal equilibrium, creating this kind of loss. That is a deadweight loss. In the U.S., this type of federal tax is typically paid via the withholding system and is subject to many deductions. And that is, of course, the federal income tax. A Pigovian tax is one designed to counter this economic phenomenon by which an economic transaction's costs are borne in part by a third party. Examples include pollution and loud music. That would be a negative externality. 74, toss-up. Remember, there's 76. In 1817, this man published a book that inspired both Piero Sraffa and Karl Marx's discussions of the labor theory of value. This man used English cloth and Portuguese wine to illustrate a theory of trade based on examining opportunity costs. On the principles of political economy and taxation was written by, for 10 points, what British economist who formulated the concept of comparative advantage? That is David Ricardo. 76, or 75, a bonus. The supply curve of this market is sometimes backward bending due to the income effect dominating the substitution effect. For 10 points each, name this market in which employees are the supply that employers demand. That is a labor market. An economy is said to be full employment may still have this kind of unemployment that occurs between changing jobs is never instantaneous. And that is frictional unemployment. The unemployment rate does not account for workers who had given up looking for work. The Bureau of Labor Statistics uses this adjective to describe workers who are marginally attracted to the labor force. That would be discouraged workers. 76, a bonus, the final one. For 10 points each, answer the following about a 1936 work, The General Theory of Employment, Interest in Money. The General Theory was written by this British economist who criticized the Treaty of Versailles and the economic consequences of the peace. And that is John Maynard Keynes. In the General Theory, Keynes argued that unemployment could be reduced by using this kind of spending to increase aggregate demand. This kind of spending is one of the main tools of fiscal policy. That is government spending. Part C, the General Theory, was published in the aftermath of this worldwide economic downturn sparked by a stock market crash in October 1929. And that, of course, is the Great Depression. And so that is the second half of Toss-Ups and Bonuses taken from NAQT Packets that were of non-national championship level. So keep studying. Good luck. Hopefully you're starting to see things repeat themselves and the canon formulating for economics.